Hello and welcome to the 2019 F1 Strategy Report, powered by Apex Race Manager, the mobile race management simulator. My name's Michael Lamonato, and this is round 10, the British Grand Prix. For the second race in a row, Formula One has dished up an instant classic, and though Lewis Hamilton managed his 7th win of the season, the result was anything but boring, with action up and down the field. The Grand Prix hinged on a mid-race safety car, but could Lewis Hamilton have got the job done anyway with his own secret strategy? To help answer that question and dissect one of the best races in recent years and perhaps even my memory, or maybe I've just got a poor memory, I'm joined by ESPN Associate Editor Nate Saunders. Nate, how you doing?
Hey mate, I'm good, thank you. And if your memory's bad, mine is bad as well, because I can't remember a better one. I was trying to think of that. Maybe one of the Bakus was good.
Yeah.
One of the two Bakus.
One of them, yeah.
But again, they've all just kind of merged into one. It was definitely the first 20 laps, pretty much as entertaining as you can get, I think, for a race for the lead and a race for the third podium spot, as it was. You don't get that often, wheel to wheel, for both of those things. So that was really good.
Almost unbecoming of Formula One. It was racing in a style we're not exactly used to in recent times.
Well, it's like all the drivers read what everybody wrote about the French Grand Prix, and it's like, you know what, we're gonna change things around, because I was pretty critical of F1 after the French Grand Prix. I think a lot of people were, and I think that those criticisms are still very valid if you look at what's fundamentally wrong with Formula One. But this showed how close it could be, how close it is to being an incredibly great sport every week, because it's based on certain ingredients, great circuit, drivers being able to race close together. Weirdly, the tyres seem to be less of an issue at the last two races. We've heard drivers saying, I can't push, and then two races where it's been less of an issue. And I know that there's different reasons at both circuits for that, but it's interesting how it's swung around. It's almost like we needed the low point of the French Grand Prix before Formula One could move on, and hopefully now we've turned a corner and we'll just get entertaining races from now on.
Yeah, 11 races in a row now. Yeah.
And then in October we'll be like, we don't need new rules, let's just keep everything the same. And then we'll get to Paul Ricard next year and we'll say, oh man.
Again.
Yeah. It's like, how did we see the signs?
Yeah,
and we'll be writing the same pieces and then, we'll start again.
It's almost cyclical, isn't it?
Maybe.
There were a lot of reasons why this race turned out to be so good. And some of them were just because, we've got a lot of good drivers and some good cars this year. One of them, though, we can go from the highs of saying, there's a battle from the lead and there was a battle for third place. I want to talk about asphalt.
Oh, good. Yes, let's get into it.
The circuit was newly resurfaced this year, which sounds very boring. And you could say that it is boring. It was resurfaced only after 1 year. Last year it was quite bumpy, but also more critically, if anyone watched the MotoGP race last year, well, you couldn't have because there wasn't one because the circuit was flooded because the drainage was very poor. But this year they've done it again. And it's not just the surface that's changed, but even some profiles of the corners have changed. Cambers have changed, which actually made the circuit in some respects a different challenge to what it was last year. Yeah,
and we saw that on Friday practice, especially. That was probably one of the most chaotic Fridays that you can think of. I know we had quite a lot happen on one of the practice sessions in Austria, but there was just drivers just couldn't keep their cars on the road. So the curious thing there is that obviously the simulators wouldn't be able to simulate changes in camber, like you say. So a lot of drivers probably had the memory of last year, how cars were, how certain bits of the track were, and were being caught out by that. Maybe we should resurface the track every race and then just ditch Friday practice and go straight into qualifying.
Wow.
Because I'm a big advocate of, I think I've said this on the show before, that we should just scrap Friday practice and go straight into qualifying, because we always see so many errors on a Friday, and then by Saturday all the teams are just in perfect shape because they've spent the whole night going over it. And that's even doubly more so when the track's resurfaced. So
I think the last episode, coincidentally enough, was last year's US Grand Prix, which had no practice on Friday. It was rained out from memory.
That's right.
And not completely dissimilar situation here. Obviously no rain, despite being in England, I suppose, despite it threatening for most of the weekend and never actually happening.
I swear there was the same rain cloud above the circuit for 4 days, just sat there. It was just like, oh, no, I'm all right.
I really expect it to rain once the race had finished, which normally tends to be the case, but not even then, which is impressive. But there was such a great setup change for so many teams from Friday to Saturday because their expectations did not meet the reality during practice. Ferrari is one we should speak of in particular because they seem to be really in a dark place on Friday. Not only did they not expect to do well here, and we'll talk in a minute why they should have expected to do well, but the tyres were being worn so badly on that Friday that had we used that as projection for Sunday, the result wouldn't have made any sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think actually that if you look at what they did overnight, you could easily make the case that Leclerc made a much better step, made a much better change than Vettel did, because Vettel's pace on Saturday was still really nowhere. And it's like he was basically learning all over again from scratch. And I think Leclerc probably was in a better position. But yeah, it was not the narrative everyone was expecting. And on Friday, a lot of the drivers were talking about the tarmac and kind of the need to change things around. I know Daniel Ricciardo was saying that, you know, there were things that basically they'd come into the weekend expecting A, and they'd gone into Friday night doing C, you know, and C wasn't even part of their battle plan. So that's quite interesting. And I think that, again, that adds to some of that variation and unpredictability, because if the teams aren't expecting things on a Friday night, then it bodes well for Saturday and for Sunday. And I think Ferrari probably, what do you think? Definitely closer than Friday suggested. But
yeah.
I came into Saturday not expecting them to be even in a fight with Red Bull. I was like, if they're looking as bad as they were, what do you think?
Yeah, that's definitely the way it looked in Friday practice, because they were wearing those tyres so hard that even by the third sector of a lap of a qualifying simulation run, the tyres were gone. Yeah. It was over. And then to get to Saturday, and Leclerc was 0.076 or something like that.
Less than I think it was closer than that.
Even closer than that, yeah.
Actually, no, I think you're exactly right. I remember that. Something like that. Anyway,
There's a six involved.
We'll say one of us is...
It was very close. The point is, it was very close.
Between
he was on for pole, essentially,
Yeah.
is the way to put it. And even Max Verstappen, Red Bull sort of played, a bit of a third character in this race, given that, Ferrari's nominally the championship challenger, so we talk a little bit more about them. But even Max said, who was, I think, maybe 1.5 tenths off pole, said it was largely down to turbo lag problems, which I've never experienced before. They didn't get the energy working correctly to fire up the turbo. So potentially, this was a 3-team fight for pole, except for Sebastian Vettel and except for Pierre Gasly. But we've talked about them before.
Well, yeah, but that's the weird thing with Gasly, is his season was so bad up to that point that his qualifying still seemed pretty good. And that's not to patronise the guy, but he's been so off colour, and, he had a good Friday, and then I think he was 3 tenths off Max on Saturday.
About that, yeah.
But he was still in the top 6 fight. The previous races he'd been absolutely nowhere. It's like he'd been driving a different car. So, I think for Gasly, he said it was his best qualifying of the season, which says a lot about his year so far. That's just a little tangent. But
just to digress very briefly here, because we might mention him a little bit later on in terms of the race strategy. But I thought what was really interesting about Gasly, and we've talked about him so much over the course of this season, given that he's done quite poorly, is that he came into this weekend for no particular reason saying, this is going to be my breakthrough. This is going to be the best weekend of the year. And they were like, okay, sure thing, mate.
Yeah.
Very good in practice. In qualifying, relatively close to Verstappen. In the race, did admirably, given that he was on a slower strategy. No particular reason for him to have done so well this weekend, but for some reason he strung it together.
Yeah, he said he was talking a lot about the work they had done with the team between Austria and Silverstone. But he surely has been doing that same work all year. Surely there are things that they've identified where he's maybe struggling. But, we don't know what's happening behind closed doors. Maybe he's been given a vote of confidence that's eased some pressure. Because Red Bull, by the sounds of it, if you're in a spiral, we saw it with Fiat, it must be a horrible place to go racing. Especially when that's just if it's just you. If you're there with Max Verstappen, it must be horrible. So, yeah, I think something changed, and I'm happy for him. If he can do 2 more good races and go into the summer break with some good form, I think that bodes well for him. Because, about 2 weeks ago, you'd have put money on him not making the end of the season, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly
in
right.
that seat. So
So we'll wait and see how that goes. To return briefly to Ferrari before we...
Yeah, sorry, I won't tangent again.
No, I value a good tangent on this program. Part of the reason why they were so quick, and this wasn't, aside from the setup changes they made on Friday, was that this circuit, whereas I suppose in generations past, in terms of cars, you might have said this should have been a Mercedes track. And this is what Ferrari was saying as well.
Yeah.
The cars have such a high latent level of downforce. Every car, including the Williams car, believe it or not, that so much of this circuit is now essentially a straight, which then swings things back towards Ferrari's engine.
Yeah, and it's weird, isn't it? Because that's kind of what we saw in previous years with Mercedes in some circuits, was that some circuits were so quick that they just retained that advantage, and now Ferrari has that engine advantage. So I think Christian Horner said that come race day, the Ferrari was so hard to catch in a straight line. And that's where they were then kind of brought back into that fight with Red Bull, was the fact that the car, was just performing so well. So that was surprising. And I don't know, I guess bodes well for Ferrari. in a way.
I suppose so.
Given that there's some circuits coming up where maybe you could say have similar characteristics a little bit that you wouldn't have normally given Ferrari a tip of the cap to. So, yeah. I'm glad they were closer because it looked at one point like it was just going to be Mercedes, Ferrari just floundering around, not really knowing what they're going to do, and then Max somewhere up there, doing his thing. So
it's good. It was a good result, and I suppose circuits like Spa certainly. Well, for Ferrari's sake, Monza, you'd think that's a track they could be doing well at.
Well, yeah, I think if they don't win at Monza, then they're probably going to have a serious look at themselves, because that at the moment looks like the most logical place to win a race. Spa as well, you'd say potentially. I mean, definitely has characteristics where they should be strong. So yeah, I think they're not going to win the championship this year, but that should have raised optimism that they can at least salvage something with some wins. Yeah, so I'm putting my neck on the line and saying Ferrari won't win the championship. You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I saw you look shocked then, but that's just my opinion, man.
You're breaking my heart.
It would be a great comeback, wouldn't it, if they won somehow?
Incredible. Yeah.
I mean, completely hypothetical situation,
exactly,
but it
would be. You'd be absolutely right.
Yeah.
One other thing to pick up from qualifying, though, other than the closeness, we had the start of an interesting tyre strategy. We didn't actually get to see this completely come to fruition, given there was a safety car intervention, but.
Yeah.
I thought what was really interesting about this was that the medium tyre, not for the first time, was favoured in Q2 for those expecting to be in the top 10 shootout. Mercedes and Red Bull Racing both used it. Ferrari appeared to be thinking about it at the start. In fact, they set their first lap in Q2 on the medium, but then changed their minds towards the end, and Leclerc and Vettel both went on the soft. And it seemed to be only because they wanted to do something different without any grander plan in mind.
Yeah. It's weird. I think with Vettel they had to, just to be safe, because his first lap, I think he was about 7th after the first runs on the medium. So to be safe, you go out. Leclerc obviously dropping out into Q1 in Monaco was around what they did with tyres and not being very sensible with things. So I think that made sense. But Leclerc was top, wasn't he, with the medium tyre?
So, yeah.
And then went and improved on the soft tyre, which, unless it was purely, like you say, to give them a different strategy to Mercedes, it doesn't seem to get. And obviously, with hindsight, we know how the race panned out, and that it was definitely better to start how Mercedes and Red Bull did. But yeah, I guess I think Ferrari have been a bit spooked by what happened in Baku, so they put they put Leclerc out on that was the medium tyre, the less grippy tyre, which they should have won in Baku. They did that to get a strategy advantage, and obviously it gives you less grip. At Baku, he made a mistake, went into the wall. Obviously ruined his race, but I think it has less danger of going into the wall in Silverstone. That was just a tiny mistake and he hits a wall. But I wonder if that's just got into their psyche now and they think, but that's the only way you can explain it, because he already had the time set on the soft tyre. So I don't understand what was going on, which is probably the catchphrase for Ferrari's season right now.
We will get to more. We don't know what's going on with Ferrari.
But do you think there was was it just for the convenience of having an offset strategy? Because I suppose there's an argument there. If you think two strategies are going to be close, why not try the other one? Especially if you think the other guys have potentially got a quicker car for the circuit, as Ferrari did think. Maybe there's something to it. Maybe they were anticipating an earlier safety car.
Potentially.
Because there's actually quite a lot of safety cars at Silverstone. It's quite common.
Despite the fact that there's quite a lot of runoff.
Yeah.
Not so close.
If you actually think back historically, recent past, there's been loads, so that might have coloured the decision a bit. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, and this goes back a little bit to the Friday data that, in essence, sort of proved faulty by the end of Sunday, not because it was incorrect, but because there was so much learning done over the course of those 2 days that it seemed like there wasn't really going to be much difference between the soft and the medium. In fact, a lot of teams, whilst very vehemently justifying whatever tyre they chose, then went on to say, but there's not a lot of difference. So it doesn't make a lot of difference.
I do love those tyre clarifications that teams have, where they're like, well, there's this, but probably nothing in it. And
you're going to have to change them anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think a little bit of that played into it. And we talk a lot about the idea that, well, the soft tyre off the line offers this great grip advantage. You'll get the lead. I can't remember the last time that actually happened.
Well, if you were seeing people on the soft tyre, like, whizzing into turn one and the guys on the medium, like, chugging along in 6th, I think there'd be a big argument to it. But it's minimal. And I guess maybe, minimal could be the difference between getting to turn 1 a bit ahead of another guy, but it seems to be a stretch of an argument that that's your only reason to put a guy on the soft tyre, if it's just for the advantage off the line. There's
the factor that, and this is something we can look at and consider, particularly with Mercedes' different strategies, regardless of the safety car, is that after Friday, there was such a strong idea that this was going to be a two-stop race. And for most people, it was.
Yeah.
But there was evidence that it didn't have to be. But there was such a strong idea it was going to be a two-stop race that if you start on the soft and the medium, the difference between them is not so much. There's not that much greater flexibility earned on the medium if you're going to stop twice.
Yeah.
And in the end, that proved to be kind of incorrect because as Hamilton showed at the first into the race, that's not the way this race had to pan out. And if we look at this strategy in particular, okay, the safety car played a role. We'll talk about it in a second. But Hamilton, among a couple of other drivers, showed that a stop straight from the medium, around lap 20, coincidentally enough, with that safety car, and then onto the hard, was enough to make it to the end. And the fact he set that fastest lap right on his final lap proved it.
Yeah, I mean, the fastest lap was super impressive because, that's right at the end. That should be when the tyre's struggling. And, Bottas had just put on, I think they were used soft tyres.
Yeah.
But he was able to beat Bottas's time on a set of used soft. So clearly, I think people just massively misjudged the hard tyre in this case. The Hamilton one is really interesting because he clearly, by the sounds of what he said afterwards, he wanted an offset strategy. We were talking about Ferrari and offset strategy, but obviously if the other guy you're racing for the win against is in the same car, you need some variation. And he obviously saw that the hard tyre the one stop and moving on to the hard tyre gave him that. And I guess he would have known that in his back pocket he could always stop again if he had to, and probably give a Mercedes advantage. And what we've seen if you take Austria out of the equation, he probably still would have been okay to score a podium. So I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting call, and it's quite interesting that he kind of went against what the team wanted him to do and said ahead of the race, they said you can do a two-stop, and he said, no, I'm staying out, doing this one-stop strategy. And like you say as well, the safety car kind of ruined how it would have played out because it would have been fascinating. I think he said he could have just sat behind Valtteri for the whole race, knowing that either Valtteri's tyres would have just completely gone off at one point, or Valtteri would have had to pit. But he would have had to pit either way, I guess. So, yeah, really interesting. I was going to raise something that I thought was actually kind of more fascinating from a Mercedes point of view, is why they stuck Bottas. They did medium with him.
Yes, and this is really what decided the race.
Yeah, because that, to me, I can totally understand that them saying, okay, we'll do a two-stopper with you, but that meant that regardless of what happened, he had to stop again. And it doesn't give you much flexibility in a safety car window, as we saw with that. If Verstappen had still been in play, I think Bottas would have finished third. Because if you think about, and that's what Horner said afterwards, he said if Vettel hadn't hit Verstappen, he would have had the track position, and probably the pace difference wasn't that big. So weirdly risky by Mercedes.
It's unusual that we do have the opportunity to criticise Mercedes. But I think this really goes back to the fact that so many people, bar one of the exceptions being Lewis Hamilton apparently, was so convinced that this was a two-stop that switching Bottas from a medium to a medium and thereby mandating a two-stop because you have to use two different compounds of tyre was a really, at the time seemed logical, but really essentially stitched him up more so than the safety car on its own, because had he gone for what would have been a more flexible, less quick strategy in the middle of the race, but ultimately more flexible, hard compound tyre in the middle, in which he effectively would have lost nothing. Okay, might have been a bit slower, but a second pit stop, which we're already banking on for a medium or a soft at the end, would have then essentially been cost neutral.
You would have had it out.
Exactly right.
And there was no out for Bottas. He had to do two stops at that point, and Lewis didn't have to do a second. So.
And that, more than the safety car, stitched him up because while Hamilton already had this plan, this is worth talking about as well, because it's very rare that we talk about a driver dictating strategy compared to a team strategy point of view. Mercedes went in, as we sort of said, with this idea they were definitely going to do a two-stop. Talk about Lewis wanting to do an offset, but in his head it was less so an offset and more just a completely different strategy. Yeah. The real shame here is not that necessarily the safety car jumped him ahead, but we didn't get to see how these two strategies would have met, because he was convinced that stopping at around lap 20, maybe lap 22, onto the hard would have been enough to get him past Bottas two-stopping. Yeah. It's hard to say whether or not that would have happened, but it would have been a fascinating end to this race.
Well, yeah, and I think he pointed out, so he finished about 21 seconds up the road of Bottas, which is obviously once Bottas has made his stop for the softs on lap 45. And he said, well, that gap, I probably would have had about the same gap anyway, because obviously Valtteri would have still needed to pit anyway. Yep. So he really said that, if you take the safety car out of the equation, the race probably still would have finished exactly the same.
Maybe 10 more seconds on Hamilton's time. Because about a 10-second stop, I think, behind a safety car compared to 20 for Silverstone.
So I think he was anticipating he'd still have a healthy lead over Bottas. And Yeah, it all comes down as well, doesn't it, to the argument about track position in Formula One. How much do you value track position over a slightly quicker strategy on paper? And in this position, Lewis was laughing because even if he came out of that stop, even if there had been no safety car, and let's say he stopped on lap 22, came up behind Bottas, I think he would have just sat there the whole race. Even Lewis might have just sat there the whole race. Maybe he'd have tried to pass him, but he wouldn't have needed to. I kind of, like you say, rare time when we can just say Mercedes kind of messed up, and you don't often get to say that. And it's a shame as well because it's on Bottas. If they'd messed up on Lewis, I think it kind of makes things a bit more interesting in terms of the championship.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we know that Lewis isn't exactly keen on that happening.
Yeah,
and is very vocal about it. So yeah, it's kind of a shame that what was a classic start to a race was kind of fizzled out. Because I think we all would have wanted to see how that played out, and they might have met at the end and it might have been very close. It might have been Lewis just waltzing to the flag, but not knowing is the frustrating thing.
Yeah, especially on a weekend where Bottas put in a pretty well-rounded performance, not only scoring pole by a very slim margin, but the fight that he fought back with Hamilton. At no point did it look like he was willing to concede position for hope that strategy might save him. This was a race he was going to fight to win. Would have been fascinating to see that logical conclusion of him fighting to keep that lead or overtake Hamilton and reverse the roles by having 2 stops to 1.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, this was the first time we really saw Bottas get his elbows out. Like when Hamilton went past him at Luffields, I thought, okay, that's game, set and match. It's done. And that speaks volumes to what we've not come to expect, but Bottas is just, occasionally he's just not quite had that fight. I'll never forget, it was I think Bahrain last year, he was chasing Vettel. And everyone said, why didn't you lunge at the end? And you look at some of the guys on the grid, Verstappen, Ricciardo and Lewis, they would have gone for it. Bottas didn't. And, maybe it's easy to sit here and say that. So it was good to see that Bottas coming out of that corner. So, well, actually, on your home race, it's your home race. I'm not going to let you boss me around. And that move back at Copse was great. He gets back on the inside. And I don't think Lewis was expecting it. If you look where Lewis positions the car, I don't think he expects that Bottas is going to come back. And I think that, again, says where Bottas is. So it's a shame that he's probably come out of the weekend quite deflated because it was such a good performance to that point. And he really didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
He did really nothing wrong. It just was that, some lady luck went against him massively.
Yeah, that's what we call Antonio Giovinazzi in the paddock, I think. Or his drive shaft, I think, is the speculated upon reason for him to end up in the gravel.
Well, I mean, there'll be a few things Bottas can look at last year that cost him, a tiny bit of debris in Baku, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
And now he can just point at an Italian guy that drives for Alfa Romeo.
That's exactly right. I'm sure there'll be some kind of tension between them from now on. That's how the battle for the lead panned out, but there was a great deal extra interest in the battle for the podium. It was Leclerc versus Verstappen for a lot of the race. And there are a couple of different flashpoints in this one. Let's talk about the first one very briefly. The first pit stops on lap 13. They stopped on the same lap. Yeah. This is where the teams really came into play because they did not emerge from pit lane in the order they went in.
No, they didn't. And that was actually, I'd forgotten about it. In all the brilliant fighting that they did, watching some highlights, I completely forgot briefly that they'd done that. Amazing job by Red Bull when you see it. Such a quick pit stop. And Ferrari's wasn't slow. Yeah. It was literally, we were talking less than a second in it, I guess, in terms of the turnaround. And that's that's the whole thing with strategy these days, isn't it? Is that it's all about how quickly you can get out of the pit lane. And I love the fact that they went down wheel to wheel as well, which obviously in Monaco, Max couldn't do with Bottas because it's such a narrow pit lane. And but then he came out and he made a mistake, right? He came out and
complained of the lack of grip on those tyres.
It took him longer to get comfortable with them, whereas Leclerc was straight on it, and I think pretty much got past him straight away. Just quickly, I mean, how good was that Leclerc-Verstappen fight? It was awesome.
Superb. It was really... I thought what I really enjoyed about it, aside from the racing itself, was that we obviously had a bit of a taster in Austria. Yeah. And they bummed. There was a bit of, let's say, aggro after the race. There was a big investigation, and Charles Leclerc thought it was inconsistent. But he said ahead of Silverstone that, I'm happy that this is the standard. But it'd be so easy to write that off as someone saying, well, I accept it, but I don't accept it sort of thing. But the way they fought on track showed there didn't seem to be any bitterness or toxicity from that moment at all. That they were both genuinely happy that that is the standard because they both showed they were so capable of raising of lifting themselves to that standard. And as a result, we got this great, really long race between them. Yeah,
absolutely. And there was a great moment that Leclerc showed. It was at the penultimate corner at Vale, just after the safety car restart, I think. But he kind of goes around the outside of Vale, and then on the final corner,
Yes.
forced Max wide. They didn't touch wheels, but he forced Max wide. And if you actually put that next to the Austria moment, obviously the cars are the wrong way around in that case. But that seemed to me to be Leclerc saying, okay, I know where the boundaries are with Max, and Max respected them, Leclerc respected them, and then I think Max won the drag race. That's actually what got Max ahead of Leclerc, and he stayed there from that point. But yeah, it was great to see, and it's just, again, a shame. I think that without the safety car, they probably would have been fighting next to each other the whole race. Leclerc faded a bit back because, as this as the graph that we're definitely not looking at in front of us shows, he had to move on to a used set of hard tyres, which is interesting again. And he was really upset with the way things had panned out. He was saying, how did we lose positions? And he dropped right to the bottom of that pack. And suddenly Vettel was the Ferrari in the ascendancy, which must have infuriated him, because he'd really been much better than him all weekend to that point.
This was the interesting second flashpoint that was not on the track, I should say, because there were plenty that were on the track, is that this safety car really made Ferrari make some decisions. Now, much as Lewis Hamilton, which they don't like to do,
which we know, I can't imagine what happens on a Ferrari pit wall when they have to make a decision. They're just like, oh, what do we? What happens here?
I hope there's just a button that they press, and then they don't know what happens when they press it. Just some wires connect, and then something happens. Hamilton obviously capitalised a lot. He got essentially a free pit stop. Sebastian Vettel was next on the road because he hadn't already made that first pit stop. His lap 20 was pretty much right on the boundary when teams are starting to make these decisions to stop naturally. He was brought in and gained a great deal because he was sixth at the time. In fact, he'd just been passed by Gasly before Gasly pitted. It was a little bit earlier, I should say. So he was net sixth, I should say. Gained third. Essentially came out third behind Valtteri Bottas. He gained a great deal. 15 seconds down the road, however, was Leclerc ahead of Verstappen. The two were battling. They didn't double stack. They chose to prioritise Sebastian Vettel in this position. You can kind of understand why, of course. He was ahead of the road. He had a great deal to gain. But and the question I asked you, because it's a deeply subjective matter, I suppose, given that Leclerc was very much the lead driver this weekend, was head and shoulders above Vettel for the entire weekend, was it correct to prioritise Vettel in a way that essentially should have, had Verstappen not had that crash towards the end, but would have cost him a podium place?
Well, yeah, and I think this comes down to in Ferrari's head, and I think Binotto said it ahead of the weekend. In their head, in the 50-50 decisions, Vettel still gets the call. And it's been a running joke, but I think it's because there's a huge degree of truth in it, is that it's like they have the strategy for the number 5 car, and they're like, right, we've got all of these plans. And I saw jokes going around on Reddit, people saying, oh, they just forgot they had a second car. And we've made that joke time and time again this year. So it is weird that because Mercedes there would have just double stacked.
Exactly. And there was a big enough gap to do it.
Yeah, and we saw that in Monaco. Remember when, was it Monaco this year they double stacked? There was a double stack.
It was one of the races earlier this year. I forget which one it was.
And it's so impressive when Mercedes do that, because it immediately takes any of that doubt out of the equation. You're not leaving one driver out to dry. And when you have a situation like that, where people already assume you are doing that with one driver, if you then make a decision like this, because, I mean, Leclerc, he should have been. I think he was unlucky that he was on Seb had done a good job to go longer on the soft tyre, so maybe he deserved priority treatment that way. But Leclerc should have still been brought in. So really, really strange. And to be honest with you, when Vettel was on, when the safety car happened like it did, I had two thoughts. I thought, well, one, Hamilton's probably won this race. Secondly, I thought, well, Vettel has to finish on the podium now. I couldn't see any way that he shouldn't have finished there. I don't know. I just felt like it put him in such a good position, and
it should have. Yeah, you're
right. He just didn't have any pace all weekend.
The whole weekend, whether he struggled to find exactly the setup that he was comfortable with. We know he's I suppose, a slightly more sensitive driver when it comes to extracting the maximum from a car. He wants things exactly correct, but it's exactly right. He didn't have pace compared to Verstappen. He didn't have to pass Pierre Gasly, but he was moved past Gasly, made up that ground, because Verstappen at this point was on essentially 2 stops, because he had already made a stop before the safety car and then made one behind it. They were both on hard tyres. Admittedly, his were newer. Chased him down, got the move done, more to the point, and then, of course, there was a crash for Sebastian Vettel. I know this is not strictly speaking strategy, but this is another crash for Sebastian Vettel. There's, I think you made the probably poignant remark that it's been pretty much a year now since the last time he looked like a really World Championship winning driver. This time when he won Silverstone last year, and ironic enough that the 1 year anniversary, this happens.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they were showing highlights of it in Ferrari ahead of the weekend.
This is right. Yeah, you're
and
right.
I remember looking at it and I was thinking, Seb looked amazing then. And obviously 2 weeks later, Germany happened. I think just as a, like, I know we get straight back onto the strategy stuff, but the tagline, and then there was a crash, seems to be like the tagline, like it could be the final chapter in the biography on Vettel, because I just think mentally he is gone. You know, I just don't imagine him making that mistake at the start of 2018, and it's so strange. Especially when you think about how good he used to be, how relentlessly good he used to be at the start of this decade. He's just a complete shadow of that, and I think that a lot of it must be, you know, if you're having a weekend like he had, lack of pace. Max is just so fast as well, and Vettel doesn't seem to deal now with that pressure so well like he might have used to. So, yeah, really, really strange. Sorry, that was another tangent. I've done about three. No, but
any important one. Hey, it affected the order of this race.
Yeah.
Completely undid the good strategy work Red Bull Racing had put in to get Max Verstappen into what was a podium-winning position.
Yeah. Well, it did win Ferrari a podium, though. So,
technically, he did the good work.
If anything, Vettel saw that he's okay, if it's not going to be me, it's not going to be Max. It's got to be Charles. And just went for it. So yeah, maybe that's the strategy layer that we. That's a joke, obviously. By the way, anyone listening, I'm not accusing Vettel of some sort of Crashgate style scenario.
Not
just
yet.
Joking. Wait
till it really starts to finish up for him. So that essentially robbed Max Verstappen of a podium, put Charles Leclerc back into a podium winning position on an accidental two-stop, I suppose, if you like. It wouldn't have been the way that it happened. Pierre Gasly finished fourth. Again, is partly because Max Verstappen crashed out, and I suppose Sebastian Vettel as well. But he did a one-stop. He successfully did quite a long one-stop too, because he wasn't so far off the pace despite running the hard tyres from lap 12. And this is our first hint as we run down the order that the one-stop actually was very possible. Yeah,
absolutely. And actually, it's quite an impressive stint, because obviously he didn't stop under the safety car and would have finished behind Verstappen without that crash. But I think it's still pretty impressive that he went that far. And like you say, vindicates that whole idea. And if you actually look down the order, there's no one else that went as long for their second stint as him. Obviously, that's with a safety car there, so, you know, would he have done it without is a fair argument. But, yeah, impressive. And it's easy for it. That's the great thing about these strategy calls is that we can now sit and look at that at the time. But I guarantee you, I reckon Red Bull assumed they would have to pit Gasly until the safety car happened. And then they thought, okay, we can go to the end with Pierre. That's why they didn't pit him again. Try and get that track position. I can only assume that's why they didn't bring him in again. Whereas with Max, they thought we can do something different. And crucially, put him on the hard tyre to go to the end. You know, if Max had gone onto the hard tyre on lap 13, I think he would have stayed out as well. Yeah. You know, so it's very much Red Bull realising that Gasly was in a good position. Let's do the same with Max, bring him in again. Yeah, and
so, it all works together like that. One of the bigger gainers from a one-stop strategy that wasn't, of course, Lewis Hamilton was Carlos Sainz, 13th to 6th in the end, thanks to
I'm calling him Sunday Sainz now because he's just so damn good on Sundays.
It's not that it's 2 races in a row now, I think, where he's recovered a great deal on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, people said Lewis was the big winner, the safety car. Sainz easily was the biggest winner on the grid, and that whenever you say that in F1, people think you're criticising someone somehow. But the reason he was the big winner is because he went for 20 laps on the soft tyre. So he did a really good job to start off. It's exactly the same as Lewis. You know, they were obviously thinking already of is he in one-stop strategy? And when he heard the word safety car in his ear, he must have thought this is beautiful because it elevated him. I think he then went straight to best of the rest and basically stayed there the whole race. I think he had Ricciardo behind him. Sainz was tremendous. And Norris, bless Norris, like he was the opposite. It really caught him out, and he was upset on the radio about the strategy. I guess when he's come out of the car, he's probably seen that it was just bad luck. But Sainz. Yeah, I mean, what do you make of Sainz recently? Because he seems to be the guy you want in your car if you're in the midfield team at the moment. Exactly, he seems to be really good at getting the most out of his tyres. So if you're a strategist, you must think this guy's great because I can open up so many options to him. And he's just quick as well. Yeah,
I think, the pace is something that I feel like has always been slightly underestimated with Sainz. I think because he started partnered with Verstappen, and then he sort of had a little bit of a destabilised career since then. But the experience over that course of time, maybe that's because he's driven quite a few different cars now, means that he's got those sort of skills that are such so beneficial in the midfield when you're trying to find these tiny advantages, given it's so tight, to get an advantage over, let's say, Renault, as is the case for McLaren this season. Lando Norris is doing very well, to keep him quite honest. But Sainz, occasionally, those little percentages, I suppose, are helping him out. But, in this case, as you said, Norris falling behind was 100% due to strategy. And if we have a look at the way pit stop strategy worked out, with the exception of Kimi Raikkonen, which is incredible, because his strategy is a complete outlier.
Yeah, Kimi makes no sense when you look at it. There's no way he should have finished where he did, really.
To stop on lap 17 off the medium onto the hard, still finished in the points somehow. There's no real rhyme or reason other than the fact that he used those tyres extremely well. But with the exception of him, everyone who stopped behind the safety car gained. And that includes, of course, Carlos Sainz. Daniel Ricciardo made a second unscheduled stop, having already made a stop earlier in the race. And Daniel Kvyat behind him stopped, albeit one lap late behind the safety car, but still. And the losers, Hülkenberg, Norris, Albon, all chose not to stop because they were all having a crack at either a conventional two-stop or a long one-stop.
And it's, and that's the interesting thing, because those three started on the soft tyre and they didn't stop again. Kvyat and Ricciardo both did start on the soft tyre as well, but were still brought in for that second stop. So I think at that point it was just which pit will believed one stop was possible still and which one wasn't. And interestingly, that you can see a lot of teams there split their strategy. So look, Ricciardo, Renault split, so they put Ricciardo, pit him again, kept Hülkenberg out. Toro Rosso, pit Kvyat again, kept Albon out. And obviously McLaren were kind of, I don't know what's happening with Norris. Came in later, I guess I'm not sure if he had any contact with someone, but he pitted again, completely out of sync of everyone else. But that was quite interesting. So you can see there that teams were basically gambling on one of their guys being on the right strategy and possibly one being on the wrong one, and just hoping that it played out well.
And it played out, of course, for 50% of them. It turned out that the stopping behind the safety car and running what essentially would have been like a one-stop, a long final stint, but having the advantage of stopping later worked out for all of them, because they were right on the cusp on lap 20, and it shows for no driver more so than Alex Albon, who was on the medium tyre right through to the end, a huge stint on that tyre, and it was only in the final few laps that it started to fade for him, where he was passed. He was running in the points towards the end and passed by everyone on the one stop, and even fell behind Norris and Hülkenberg, but came within only a couple of laps of that strategy working out for him. So it shows how fine a line it was. Yeah,
and you have to wonder whether Mercedes thought about that with Bottas. Obviously in the end they had such a big gap, there was no need to do that. But whether they thought, hey, we can bring this car home on the medium tyre. But Albon, it was pretty painful at the end to watch, because he obviously did the cut. He'd just gone way too long on them, and it must have been horrible. Those final laps, you've just got nothing, no way of defending at all. Because otherwise, he would have been one of the drivers of the day, I think, Albon, because he did a really good job on those. On those medium tyres in the second stint.
Yep, to make them last so long. That's the way the strategy for the British Grand Prix panned out. It was varied across the grid. We had some great racing, more to the point, I think, not simply tyre strategy dictating where everyone finished. And as a result, we've got a race that, I want to say probably won't be top this season, but I want to leave my options open just in case it is.
I don't know what to think anymore, Michael. I just have no idea. We could be in Germany. We could have double the excitement, or we could have French Grand Prix levels of excitement. I just don't know anymore.
It's hard to know.
It's fun again. F1's back to. Will it be quite dull? Will it be average? Will it be amazing? I love it.
It's hard to know when you don't come away from a race criticising the sport. Maybe you start to criticise yourself. It becomes an internalised problem. I'm not sure. But it was a pleasure to have a good race. Nonetheless, it was a pleasure to analyse it with you, Nate.
Thank you very much.
That was ESPN Associate Editor Nate Saunders. The Strategy Report is powered by Apex Race Manager, the mobile race management simulator. Play it for free on iOS and Android devices. If you want more Strategy Report, you can get every episode by subscribing on Google and Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on your favourite podcast app, plus all of your socials. And if you like what you've heard, we'd love it if you could give us a rating and a review to help other F1 fans find the show. The Strategy Report is a Beer Mogul podcast, and if you're looking for an alternative take on the British Grand Prix, have a search for Box of Neutrals in your podcasting app of choice to hear Rob James and I lament that there aren't more rich energies in Formula One. I've been Michael Lamonato. Look me up at Michael Lamonato on Twitter, and I'll catch you in a couple of weeks for the German Grand Prix.